Chris, despite violent aspects over the last three Saturdays in the Gilets Jaunes movement, it remains supported by a majority of the French people. Give us some insight into why that is, why we're still seeing it go on week after week after week now.
Well, good morning. I think that the reason why it continues to have popular support amongst the French population is because it's touched a nerve in terms of the general sense of malaise or frustration that exists in French society today around the issues of spending power, the economic direction, the type of leadership that Macron has had since he's been in l'Elysee. So it's not surprising that despite some of the violence that we have seen over the course of the last 3 or 4 weeks, that the general population still backs the Gilets Jaunes movement. I do think that this weekend may be slightly different given the changing context.
And give us a sense of how you see this possibly playing out. Obviously, there are different possibilities, but can you give us a sense of what those possibilities are? Because I think the government would have hoped, having made a certain amount of concessions, certainly the major concession being the fuel tax, which was the catalyst for all of this, that things would have begun to calm down. That doesn't appear to be the case. What are the possible outcomes now, do you think?
Well, I do think that the early pictures from Paris this morning certainly indicate that we are seeing a certain slowdown in the movement, and to some extent that's not really that surprising. I mean, when you think of the sort of convergence of circumstances, so the way in which the demonstrations were handled last week in Paris quite effectively by the police, would have put off some people thinking that they can repeat the actions of the previous week. Undoubtedly, Macron's concessions on the fuel tax, minimum wage, will have placated some of the more moderate elements of the Gilets Jaunes movement. We must take into consideration also that we're heading towards the festive period and the holiday period, which will take some sting out of it. But then I think probably the most important aspect has been the events in Strasbourg of last week, which has very much changed the dynamic and the context and the debate. That's moved the debate away from the Gilets Jaunes movement to a certain extent, and it will have changed people's attitudes towards security, violence. I mean, the idea that a group of casseurs, as they're called, will be allowed to run around tearing the Champs-Élysées asunder is just not going to be accepted, given the context and the fears that will exist after this terrorist attack. And I think also that there will be some softening perhaps towards the attitude of the police as people understand that they have other priorities as well as dealing with the Gilets Jaunes movement. So I wouldn't be surprised to see things calm down over this weekend and then into the Christmas period. But I wouldn't have thought that this will be the end of the movement. And in some respects, it may be just a pause that's required for the Gilets Jaunes movement to take a step back and establish some sort of structure and define its objectives more clearly.
Now, much of the movement seems to focus on the person and personality of Emmanuel Macron. Do you think that's legitimate, or is he becoming the sort of punching bag in some senses for built-up frustrations in France about perceptions of a political elite, an economic elite that's cut off from much of the country?
Well, I think given the nature of the Fifth Republic Constitution, the president dominates. So it's no surprise to me that he's going to come in for criticism. This has perhaps been exacerbated by the way in which Macron has carried himself during his time as president over the course of the last 18 months, where he has perhaps projected an image of a kind of sort of regal president who tries to exist above the humdrum of daily life, and he has made a few mistakes and gaffes for which he apologised in his television address on Monday. You know, he accepts that he has perhaps been slightly patronising in some of his remarks. So I think that the Fifth Republic's political system is set up for the president to dominate, and it's no surprise that people are taking aim at him. But I also think that the way in which he's carried himself and the way in which he's distanced himself up until Monday before he spoke to the people has meant that it's an obvious he's been an obvious target for the general population and for the gilets jaunes.
Okay,